nappy. It's not feeding time yet. Do you know how I know? It's because I know how to read a watch. You know what my watch says? My watch says it's not feeding time for another hour. Hello and welcome to the knitting podcast that has currently got the title The Knitting Haus Podcast. I'm not sure if I'm going to stick with it or not, but that's what it's called for now. Today I want to talk about some knitting that I did, 2 finished objects, 3 finished objects actually, one of them is quite small. My work in progress, my work to be in progress very, very soon, and about the fun I had setting yarn on fire. Don't judge, we all deal with things differently. I also have a little bit of a rant about patterns, which already contradicts what I said in the last knitting podcast, that I am not here to talk negatively and to start controversies and to be anything other than bubbly and positive. However, I recently bought a knitting pattern and I have thoughts about it. So I have the things I want to talk about in my little basket. Let's start with the finished objects. The first one is what I am wearing now, and because of my propensity for wearing dark colours, you can't actually see it, so this is a whole lot of fun. This is super useful right here. This is the Felix cardigan by Amy Christophers, which I knit up in Drops Air in the colour 06, which I believe is just called black. It is, however, not a true black, but more of a dark, do you call that mild? Charcoal. So it's the base colour is a very dark grey, and then it has little fibres of a lighter grey. What I find this yarn does is give the impression of a much more rustic and scratchy yarn, whereas actually it's quite soft. It's a blown yarn rather than a spun yarn. But the way that the colours have that... Beetle, could you stop sneezing? Minerva, can you stop eating my yarn? Don't know why, but my cats are begging for their lunch already, even though it's nowhere near lunchtime yet. So the Drops Air gives the impression of being a much rougher, scratchier, more rustic yarn than it actually is, whereas it's really quite soft and very, very lightweight. The cardigan knit up. Fine, Minerva, don't you fucking dare. The cardigan knit up just fine. I had previously knit the Felix jumper before, and so I was familiar with the ever popular eyelet increases and the general sort of vibe of this. I knew what this was supposed to look like. It has German short row shaping at the back, which I like doing, and I like the effect of it. I think it sits fairly well at the neck. It is a wide neckline. In fact, this is probably not the right top to combine it with, but whatever. I'm sure you have the imagination to picture this with something else underneath. When I finished knitting this, I said I'm never going to knit another cardigan again, but I have the self-awareness that that is a lie, and that as soon as I see another nice cardigan pattern that I like, I'm going to forget the pain of knitting back and forth, endless rounds of stockinette back and forth, flat, with a massive blanket of fabric on your lap. Oh, such a pain. However, I like wearing cardigans, and so realistically it's gonna happen again. The buttons I got were from Drops as well, I believe, but I like them. They add a little bit of interest to the plain charcoal colour of this cardigan. I am actually going to talk a little bit more about the knitting pattern at the end of the video, when I have my little bit of a rant about knitting patterns and about the some issues that I have with the Felix cardigan pattern compared to a pattern that I very recently bought. Let's move on to the second finished object, and that is the vest number 7 by My Favourite Things Knitwear. I already spoke about this last week when it was very nearly finished, and it is now finished. I don't have it, so I can't show it to you here, but here's some footage of the vest before I added the buttons. The problem I had last time was that I had crocheted the button band and the whatever you call it. It's not ribbing, obviously, but the bit that goes around the neckline. So instead of following the pattern and doing a ribbed button band, much like the Felix cardigan has, I decided to crochet it because this was supposed to be a gift for my mother. She's a crocheter. She likes it when I crochet as well. She likes the look of crochet. And I thought a crocheted button band would add something that a knitted button band, at least a ribbed button band, doesn't do. That is adding some stability, some firmness, just a neater edge than ribbing can provide. It is absolutely outrageous, by the way, that I'm sitting here drinking iced tea and it's 20 degrees outside, when yesterday it was freezing cold and tomorrow it's going to be freezing cold as well. And just for one day, it's warm. So last time, I wasn't sure whether I was going to rip out the button band and knit it according to pattern, or rip out the button band and have another go at crocheting it. However, I wasn't ready to give up on the crocheted button band altogether. And so I went for option 2, I ripped it out and I crocheted it again. And I did exactly the same thing, except I picked up fewer stitches with a crochet hook. So instead of picking up every single stitch from the edge of the knitting, I picked up 2 stitches for 3. So basically 2/3 of the amount of stitches. And I crocheted that in 5 rows of single crochet, starting at the bottom edge, going round, back, 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 and back. And that's how I ended up with 5 even rows of single crochet. Obviously in the middle row, the third one, I added the buttonholes. It turned out really well. I really liked the look of the crochet button band, and in fact I prefer the crochet button band to this rib button band. I think next time I make a cardigan, even though I said I'd never make one again, I'm probably going to crochet the button band. I like the added firmness of it and I like the look of it. I just think it's very neat and very sleek and it suits that particular vest. And I really wish I'd done it on this as well, but I wanted to compare. I wanted to have one cardigan with a crocheted button band and one with a knitted one, and I do prefer the crocheted one. Fit-wise, when I tried on the vest number 7, I didn't like how it fit. However, I didn't knit it for me, I knitted it for my mum, and she's a smaller size than me. So on me, obviously it was tight, but also there was a weird amount of fabric around the armholes, and that is because I'm quite well endowed in the chest department, and so the way that the fabric sort of bunched up next to the boobage just did not look very good. On my mum it's slightly better. I'm going to show you a picture of her wearing it where that bunching is a little bit less. However, I do wonder if that particular pattern is just made for people with a certain body type, and if that body type is a little slimmer and a little less three-dimensional, you know, if it's more for sort of straight up and down kind of people. My mum luckily liked the way that it looked on her, but I wasn't entirely happy with the fit around those armholes as well. So there's my little bit of criticism there for the vest number 7. Overall though, she really loved it. I knew that she would because I know that that's the sort of thing she wears, and when we were talking about me making something for her, she said that she would quite like a burgundy colour. That's what I ended up getting for her, and that she wanted a vest with a very deep neckline and buttons so that she can wear it over long sleeved shirts and over jumpers and t-shirts and all sorts of things. So a very successful birthday gift overall. I have one correction to make from last episode, and that is the yarn I used for the vest number 7. I said a different yarn, I said the wrong yarn. What I actually used for this vest is Drops Merino Extra Fine, which is a superwash treated DK weight yarn in the colour 48, and that's a lovely burgundy. I didn't have a whole lot of selection when it came to the yarn choice because my mom made it very clear that she wanted something that she can chuck in the washing machine, and so I went for the safest thing and got a superwash treated yarn. Now I have 4 balls of this left and I'm not entirely sure what to do with it because while knitting with this is perfectly fine, I'm not a huge fan of superwash yarns myself, except for socks, and I'm not going to make some socks out of this 100% merino DK weight yarn. So the other 4 balls might become a top or a hat, maybe a small shawl or something. I don't know yet. Maybe some gloves. I haven't figured that out yet. The colour is very much my colour as well, so happy with that, but haven't quite figured out what to do with the leftovers. The last finished object I want to show is something that I hadn't even started last time, and that is this yellow headband. As I said, I went to visit my mum, and getting there is a 2-hour train journey. And what better to do on the train than to knit and listen to some music or audiobooks. I got this yellow yarn out of my scraps, and I believe it used to be a hat that I made way back when I restarted to knit in, I think, 2018. And as a beginner hat tends to be, it was too small, it didn't fit right. So I ended up unraveling the yarn and kept it until now, until I thought, you know what, this would make a decent yarn for a headband. The reason I wanted a headband is because I cycle a lot. I don't have a car, so if I need to get anywhere that's not within walking distance, or when I do the weekly shop, I tend to use my bike. In order to not get cold ears, I really should be wearing something under my helmet. But the hat that I made, that I showed last episode, out of the Alpaca just doesn't fit under my helmet. It's enormous, very thick, and has a pom-pom. So I wanted to make myself a thinner headband that still keeps out mostly the wind. When you cycle, it's the wind really that hurts your ears more than the temperature of the air. And so I had the idea for a very plain stockinette headband that is knit as one tube, and then has the cast on edge grafted to the, well, not bind off edge, but the live stitches in, I guess, a Kitchener stitch sort of way. I'm just throwing these words around. I'm not entirely sure what a Kitchener stitch is, but anyway, that's what I ended up doing. So I cast this on during the journey, knit most of it on the way there, finished it off at my mum's, and then grafted the live stitches onto the cast on edge. I didn't do a great job at that. So if I turn this inside out, you can see here that ridge where the graft is, where the Kitchener stitch is. You can see it's not very even, but it doesn't really matter. This is a functional item, and it certainly functions as a headband. So what this is essentially 2 layers of stockinette, which is really good. It makes it very insulating, very warm. That's exactly what I want. This is what it looks like. It fits perfectly fine and has space for the helmet over top of it. Something else I wanted to do with this one was experiment with different methods of blocking. And I'd come across this video by Arne and Carlos, who, as I understand, are pretty big in the knitting world. I have to admit I hadn't heard of them before, but I came across this video of theirs about how they finish garments instead of blocking. So far I've been doing the traditional wet blocking method. You wet a garment, I don't normally pin them, I normally just lay them out to dry. So, you know, just your standard blocking method. However, they go at it with an iron and a wet towel. I'll link their video down below. There's no need for me to rehash their method when there's a video where they beautifully demonstrate that particular type of blocking. Now, I was a little skeptical. I didn't want to try attacking my freshly knitted Felix cardigan with a hot iron. But for this, for something that I made on the train using scrap yarn, I thought I might as well. And so that's exactly what I did. Now bear in mind, this was made from scrap yarn that had been unraveled. So the yarn itself was already quite curly. You know, it had that ramen texture that we know from reused yarn. And I didn't pre-wash the yarn. So the result is not as smooth as a freshly blocked item made from new yarn, but it's not awful. It works just fine. And I think I'm going to use that method again. I might even try it on a garment, but definitely for things like hats and smaller things, and even socks probably I could see blocking like that. I'll definitely do the ironing method in the future. Let me know, by the way, if you've had any experiences with that, and especially if you've blocked larger items like that using an iron. I haven't spoken about this yarn at all, and that's because I have no idea what it is. It smells of animal, so I'm guessing it is either a wool or an alpaca. I'm going to have a look in my emails because I'm fairly certain that I bought this yarn online when I lived back in the UK. And so somewhere in my inbox, I should have the email with all the details for this. And if I find it, you will find that and all of the other details in the description box. So I finished this while I was visiting my parents, and that meant that I needed something to knit on the way back, because otherwise, what am I going to do on a train? The train ride to my parents takes me across the Black Forest, which is a mountain range with very bad internet reception and phone reception in general. So you don't have a lot of things to entertain yourself on the train unless you bring your own entertainment. And I was desperate to have something to knit on the train journey back. And so I went to a shop with my parents and I bought some bargain yarn. Now, my mother, I don't want to say she has a problem, but she has a lot of cheap yarn at home. I mean, masses and masses, drawers everywhere. You open a cupboard and you're hit with an avalanche of €1 sock yarn, red label cotton yarn, mountains of pond, mountains of acrylic. I think maybe some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. My own collection is still quite contained. I'll probably do a video about that at some point, but hers certainly is not. However, we still went out to a shop and bought some more yarn. And the yarn I ended up with, that I specifically bought to knit something on the train with, is this. Oh, it's a Woolworth own brand, because we went into Woolworth, and the yarn is called Belle Day Home. It's a sock yarn. It's 100 grams, 390 meters, not super wash treated by the looks of it. 75% wool, 25% nylon, fairly standard sock yarn, slightly on the scratchy side, and in this very nondescript beige colour. This was reduced to €1, and so I thought €1 for 2 hours worth of entertainment, that's good enough for me, and I went for it. I decided to knit a hat, or start a hat on the way back. The needles, by the way, that I had with me are these circular, sock needles, right? They have this slight bend here, which is really cool, and I haven't seen that before. I'm sure it's not uncommon, but I just haven't come across sock needles like that until I found these in a local secondhand charity shop. You know the baskets of knitting needles, right, that they have in charity shops? These ones were in one such basket with a whole array of assorted straight needles. But who knits with straight needles in the year of our Lord 2023? However, among these straight needles was this set of circular sock needles, 2.75 millimeters. The brand is Pony, which I haven't heard before, and they're very, very, very pointy. They're so sharp. That's what I love about them. You knit really quickly with them because they are so sharp, they get in there super quickly. So unless you work with a very splitty yarn, and sock yarn doesn't tend to be very splitty, sock yarn tends to be nice and highly twisted and very contained, these are brilliant to knit with, and they're such a bargain. They cost me like 50 cents or something like that. So yeah, love them. However, I don't knit socks on 2.75 millimeter needles. I knit them either on 2.25 millimeters or even on 2 millimeter needles. I just like my socks quite finely knit. So I don't get a lot of use out of these needles, but I did this time. So first of all, I made the headband with those, but also I started this hat. And so far it's just rib. I want this to be like a folded over brim, so I'm getting to the point where I'll start the plain stockinette. It was just right. This is exactly the amount I managed to knit on a 2-hour train journey. I quite enjoy knitting rib, and I think that's because, so first of all, I knit continental style, but also the way I hold my yarn is quite close to the needle, and so I kind of flick the yarn back and forth with the movement of my hands. I'm going to see if I can get some footage of that so you know what I'm talking about. Either way, knitting rib is almost as quick as knitting stockinette for me, and so I don't mind knitting vast amount of rib in on a small needle at all. And this kept me entertained until I got here. I'm not sure how quickly this is going to progress from now on, because this is very much a mindless knit, so maybe this is something I'll do in front of the telly or next time I'm on a train, and then at some point I'll have a hat. What's next for me now, and I already spoke about this in the last podcast, is the Helia jumper, and I have now purchased and printed the pattern. This is a gorgeous jumper by Joanna Ang, who I have not knit before, and it is a very relaxed looking jumper with plain stockinette body and the most intricately stunning cabled sleeves. Obviously I'm not going to show you the details of the pattern, but I want to show you some things. Oh, this is weirdly stapled because I put one staple in the bottom, intending to also put another staple in the top, and then I ran out of staples. So this is just the worst stapled document you've ever seen. However, if you open up this pattern, first thing you see is a very detailed schematic size chart with all of the sizes, and incidentally, this comes in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sizes, from extra small to 5XL. Before the pattern even starts, this has an incredible amount of information about yarns, an overview over the finished bust measurements, and all of the things that you need, you know, needles and notions, etc. Then this incredible schematic, I mean really so much detail about sizing in here. A legend of abbreviations, every single term used in the pattern. A rundown of special techniques and tips with video links. And this includes things like German short rows, which I have done before, but also things that I haven't done before, such as Jenny's stretchy bind off I have not done before. And cabling without a cable needle I have also not done before. And then we get the charts, and you know, the charts are very intricate looking. One of them is a 44 row chart, so that's a bit intimidating. The legend for the chart as well, which again looks big and complicated. I can do this just fine. Next up, we have some construction notes, and then we get the knitting patterns, and the knitting patterns is written as the knitting pattern is written. However, within the knitting pattern, it refers back to the techniques and tips from earlier. So whenever there is one of the techniques and tips that they provided a link for, you can find that link and look at the technique in detail. This is an incredibly well constructed and well thought out knitting pattern that I think will suit a variety of knitters, from people who are intimidated by the sight of the sleeves like myself, to experienced knitters who can just look at that chart and basically figure out the rest themselves. I really love how much thought went into this, and how pretty much everything you need to know is presented in a really excellent way. I haven't started this jumper yet, and I'm already full of praise for Joanna Ang and for the way that they wrote this. I mean, it really is excellent. I balked a little bit at the price for this because this is an expensive pattern. I believe I paid between 9 and 10 euros for it. However, after seeing the amount of work that went into it, even before I cast this on, I'm like, fair enough. So if this is designed as well as it is written, then I am pretty certain I'm in for a treat. I'll report back on how this goes. I'm sure I'll be knitting this over a long period of time, because like I said, it does look quite complicated and intricate. Now here's the rant portion of that. The two projects that I have just finished, which is the Felix cardigan and the vest number 7, have nowhere near that amount of detail. They are much more stripped back in instructions. And for me, that was fine, because there was nothing in them that was that went over my head, that was a little bit too complicated for me. However, there wasn't the same amount of thought that was put into these patterns, I think, as there was for the Helia jumper. For example, there is one point in the Felix cardigan pattern where you put your stitches on hold for the sleeves, and then you continue working the body. And it says in the pattern, it says, place a marker for the beginning of the round. But you knit this flat, there is no round, there is nowhere to put a marker for the beginning of the round because there is no round. where you can sort of tell that what happened there was a copy-paste situation from the Felix jumper, where you do knit in the round, that was then not taken out for the Felix cardigan. That was knit flat. So I looked at that and thought, well, that makes no sense at all. There is no round. So I'm not going to just randomly put a stitch marker under one of the arms and carry that all the way down the cardigan as I knit flat. However, if someone doesn't know that, if this is a complete beginner knitting it, and I should point out, this is a pattern that's often recommended for beginners, then they wouldn't know that. And the end result is going to be the same, because all you do is pointlessly carry a stitch marker from row to row. But it's an unnecessary step, and it should have been taken out of the pattern. Something that bothered me about the vest number 7 is that it had links included to videos for special techniques. For example, there was, at one point you pick up stitches at the shoulder and you pick them up using the yarn tail. So not the working yarn, but the yarn tail. You pick up and knit them with the yarn tail first. And the reason for that is that you pick up the stitches in a specific direction. So it gives you a specific way of starting on the right side, basically, instead of the wrong side. And I thought, oh, okay, I've not done that before. I mean, I can sort of probably figure out what the designer means by that. However, there is this handy link that I can click on and that takes me to a YouTube video. Well, let me tell you, friends, the YouTube video is in Danish. And I am not Danish. The knitting pattern is not Danish. The knitting pattern is in English. So at the very least, I can expect either written instructions in English, or I can expect the video to be subtitled. But it isn't. And so it's just this video of this technique with an explanation in Danish. Apologies, by the way, if it's Swedish instead of Danish. I don't speak either, and so I'm not very good at telling these apart. That's what I mean about efforts. Both patterns that I'm talking about here, that I'm comparing to the Helia jumper, are paid for patterns. They cost me money. And if I buy a pattern that says it is in English, then I want the full explanation to be in English and not part of it be a Danish video. As the Helia jumper demonstrates, you can put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into making a pattern as accessible as possible, even for people who don't speak Danish and therefore buy an English language pattern. So that was a little more bitchy than expected, but it's buried so far at the end of the video that hopefully no one's going to be up in arms about that. I just think it's important to think about these things, right? I know that the yarn community is all very loving and friendly, and, you know, we consider ourselves a community. However, a knitting pattern is a product that I buy and that I pay money for and that I expect a certain standard from. And it's a shame, because both the Felix cardigan and the vest number 7 are great patterns. I'm happy with the result. And it's just these tiny little details that are all the more irritating because they are in the context of an otherwise really well thought out garment. There's nothing wrong with the design of either the Felix cardigan or the vest number 7. The designs of both are great. But in that process of writing it down, there could have been a little more care taken with both of these. Anyway, let's move on to the bit where I set some yarn on fire. I spoke about my mystery yarn in the last podcast, and that is a enormous hank of yarn that I found on the street, which sounds weird unless you live in Germany, in which case, you know, this is just perfectly normal. It's just another Tuesday. So I found an enormous hank of yarn that I managed to wind into a few balls. This is just one of them. What I noticed was that this yarn was incredibly fragile. I can just pull a piece off, just like that. And I was curious about what fibre this was. That's because I wanted to knit this into the Helia jumper. So this is the swatch that I already showed in the last episode, and this is made up of one strand of Drops brushed alpaca silk and one strand of street yarn. I really like how this turned out. It looks great. I like the fabric. I'm going to make the Helia jumper in this combination, but I still wanted to know what the yarn was. And so I came across this flowchart on Reddit. I'm going to see if I can find the source. Either way, it's going to be linked down below. This flowchart about identifying fabrics by setting them on fire. And so I thought, what could possibly go wrong? And I set some of this yarn on fire. So let's go through the flowchart step by step. Burn, it certainly did. It was kind of difficult to set on fire, but it did in the end burn rather than melt. And so I'm going with the third option there. Recoil slightly, ignite briefly, and chars. The next one definitely confirmed that I was going down the right path. Smells like burning hair. You can't tell in the video, but it most certainly did. And as someone blessed with very long hair, I have set my hair on fire on more than one occasion. I know that smell, and that little bit of yarn, when it was set alight, smelled like, oh no, I bent over the candle a little too much. I already had the suspicion, by the way, that this was an animal fibre, not a plant fibre and not a synthetic fibre, because of how easily it rips. And I know that wool has that quality of breaking very easily. Unlike acrylic, which is nearly indestructible when you try and pull it apart. Let's continue. It says here, burns slowly and then goes out. As you can tell in the footage, that's exactly what happened. So then we have the bit where we need to decide between silk and wool, and other animal fibres. Because I suppose it could be alpaca or yak or whatever. This is where I don't trust this chart entirely, because what happened was in fact a soft crushable bead. It did not turn to ash, but it did become a solid bead that very easily crumbled between my fingers. According to this chart, that would make this silk. But I thought that silk is the opposite of really fragile and breakable. I thought silk is really strong, and maybe that's a misconception here. If you are more familiar with knitting with silk, then maybe you can tell me, is silk very easily breakable? Because this, like I said, this pulls apart super, super easily. So I'm more tempted to think that it's wool. However, it might be a wool-silk blend, of course. That's not uncommon. Either way, if you have some opinions on this and some knowledge to share, let me know. It was fun to set something on fire. It doesn't really help with knowing exactly what kind of fibre it is. Because of the overwhelming smell of burning hair as well, I'm tempted to think it's wool rather than silk. So, finally, we get to some acquisitions. And I've already spoken about the cheap yarn I bought in Woolworth, so let's not get into that anymore. All of my other acquisitions are yarns I took from my mother's house. I've already spoken about her yarn collection, but like I said, she really adores those bargain yarns. It's the chase for her. It's the going to the shops and finding those bargains, and then she just buys them whether she uses them or not. Now, my mum has got eyesight problems. She doesn't knit with dark yarns. So what does she buy but balls upon balls of black yarn, navy yarn, dark green yarn, purple yarns that I know she can't crochet with because she can't see it well enough. Anyway, so she was very happy to let me have some of it. And this is what I ended up with finding in her drawers. 2 50-gram balls of a cotton yarn in black. This is 115 meters for 50 grams, which I think makes this DK weight. I'm not entirely sure what I can do with 230 grams of cotton yarn, but worst case is these are going to become coasters and washcloths, etc. Yeah, okay, fair enough. It is nearly your feeding time now. Then 1 ball of sock yarn. One ball of sock yarn. What the hell am I going to do with 1 ball of sock yarn? This is a 50-gram ball of weirdly knotty looking. I don't know what happened here. Plain black sock yarn. Oh no, am I becoming like my mother? I believe Oscar Wilde had a quote about that. And finally, the yarn that I'm actually most excited about is another cotton yarn, and it is this here. So this is a black and white, mild, whatever you call it. It's like black and white cotton polyester blend. So 70% cotton, 30% polyester. And I really like the look of this. This is 240 meters for 100 grams. Does that make it a sport weight yarn? Anyway, I have 3 of these. So I have a total of 720 meters of this, which would make a t-shirt, I believe, or a summer top. And I think that's what I'm going to try. I have not knitted with plain cotton before, so we'll see how that goes. I feel like people either love it or hate it. No, that's not true. People either hate it or don't mind it too much. So I'm hoping that I'm in the don't mind it too much camp, and that this is going to be just fine on my hands and not cut them into tiny little pieces, which is what I'm led to believe knitting with cotton does to your fingers. So I can imagine casting something on with this fairly soon for the summer and just seeing how it goes. Just seeing what happens if I try and knit with cotton. I also crochet a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. And so I know that these cotton yarns aren't going to go to waste, even if I end up absolutely hating working with cotton, because for crocheters, cotton is just fine. So that was all the things I wanted to talk about. I am going to have to go and feed my cats now before they eat me, and then there wouldn't be a next episode at all. But yeah, I don't know how to finish these. See, on my Booktube channel, which also is linked down below, I'll just say, let me know what you thought of this book, and then we have a fun discussion in the comments about the books that I'm talking about. Let me know if you also like knitting. See you next time. Bye.